Vulnerability as Rebellion: How Truth Telling Transforms Workplaces and Reshapes Power. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I recently had the extraordinary privilege of interviewing Brittany Jenkins, a visionary whose work has fundamentally transformed how we think about professional spaces, authenticity, and the power of vulnerability. What makes Brittany exceptional isn't just her brilliant mind or her impressive credentials, it's her courage. In a world that rewards conformity, Brittany has been a revolutionary, challenging the very foundations of what we consider professional. Her tireless advocacy has created not just ripples, but tidal waves of change across industries, challenging conventional wisdom about what strength looks like in the workplace, particularly for Black women professionals. Brittany has done something remarkable. She's created spaces where people can breathe, where they can exist without apology, where vulnerability isn't just permitted, but celebrated as a source of power. Her insights have illuminated pathways toward more equitable, compassionate, and ultimately more productive work environments. What makes her perspective so valuable is her unwavering commitment to truth telling, even when, especially when those truths are uncomfortable to hear. We've all been taught a particular story about professionalism. It goes something like this: keep your emotions in check, maintain boundaries, never let them see you sweat, project confidence at all times. Vulnerability is weakness, and weakness has no place in the professional world. But what if this story is fundamentally wrong? What if vulnerability, far from being a liability, is actually one of our greatest untapped resources for creating meaningful change in our workplaces and in our lives? What if the entire framework we've built around professionalism isn't just flawed, but actively harmful, particularly to those who have been historically marginalized in professional spaces? This is the radical idea I want to explore with you today. The notion that by embracing authentic vulnerability, particularly in professional spaces where it has traditionally been discouraged, we can build stronger connections, a more innovative teams, and more fulfilling careers. That vulnerability, properly understood, isn't weakness at all. It's a form of power, a form of resistance, a form of liberation. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds nice in theory, but in practice, in the real world of quarterly targets and performance reviews and office politics, vulnerability seems like a luxury many can't afford. And for historically marginalized groups, it can feel downright dangerous. This concern is valid. It's grounded in very real experiences, but the evidence I've gathered suggests something remarkable. When we create intentional spaces for authentic vulnerability, particularly for those whose voices have been systematically silenced, we unlock extraordinary potential, not just for individuals, but for entire organizations. Let me share with you the story of Letitia Clark. Letitia founded the Pink Parachute Diaries podcast with a clear mission to amplify the voices of Black women by providing an uncensored platform for authentic storytelling. She created this space after witnessing a disturbing pattern. Talented Black women professionals were being handed pink slips, while underperforming colleagues, often men, were rewarded with golden parachutes. Letitia saw something that many organizations refuse to acknowledge. Black women professionals were experiencing profound isolation in their workplaces. Their struggles were systematically silenced, and many believed their challenges were unique simply because they had no visible community where these experiences were validated. The isolation itself became another burden to bear. So, Letitia built something revolutionary: a space centered on truth telling, vulnerability, empathy, and compassion. She invited guests to speak freely about both their triumphs and their traumas without fear of judgment. The result? The podcast fostered deep connections among listeners. It became a source of healing through shared experience. Hundreds of stories have been shared on her platform. Listeners report feeling seen, heard, validated, and most importantly, motivated to advocate for themselves at work. The movement has inspired similar platforms nationally, and organizations now seek guidance from Letitia on building inclusive communities. What's remarkable about this case is how it challenges our fundamental assumptions about professional development. Traditional models focus on skill building, networking, and strategic career moves. But Letitia's approach suggests something different, that healing, community, and authentic self expression are not separate from professional growth. They're essential components of it. This brings me to our first key insight. Vulnerability is not a weakness, but a strength. Creating spaces where professionals, particularly those from marginalized groups, can express authentic vulnerability is transformative. Contrary to the belief that vulnerability in professional environments signals weakness or risk, opening the floor for genuine sharing builds long term empathy, compassion, and connection, qualities that strengthen both teams and individuals over time. Let's look at another powerful example. Julie Craig's advocacy within her organization led efforts toward workplace equity after she recognized patterns of discrimination affecting Black employees' advancement opportunities. The challenges she faced were substantial. Rising racial discrimination was met with organizational inertia. Documentation of incidents was actively discouraged, while emotions were policed under stereotypes like angry Black woman. What did Julie do? She established employee resource groups focused on honest dialogue about race at work. But here's the crucial part: she prioritized psychological safety so team members could share openly without fear of reprisal. This wasn't just about creating a space to vent, it was about creating a foundation of trust from which real organizational change could emerge. The outcomes were remarkable. Employees felt empowered to document incidents safely. Leadership committed resources toward anti racism training based on collective feedback. Julie secured executive buy in for cultural audits and implemented regular listening sessions between staff and management, leading to measurable policy changes around hiring and promotion practices. Other companies have since adopted similar models after seeing improved retention rates among Black talent. This case illustrates our second key insight: community trumps isolation. The most profound growth occurs when we break our silence and share our stories with others who understand our journey. By fostering intentional community, we dismantle isolation and provide validation for experiences that are often marginalized or dismissed in mainstream professional settings. Now, you might be wondering, this sounds powerful for addressing systemic issues, but what about individual leadership? How does vulnerability translate to effective management? This brings me to the story of Tanjra Rouse, who navigated predominantly white corporate environments as one of few senior Black women leaders willing to model what she calls uneven leadership. Leadership rooted in transparency about both strengths and struggles. Tanjra faced skepticism regarding her emotional openness. She was told she was too vulnerable amidst pressure to conform or suppress feelings deemed unprofessional by dominant culture norms. But rather than adapting to these expectations, she transformed them. She began each team meeting with check ins, encouraging everyone, from interns to executives, to voice concerns authentically before discussing business topics. She also mentored junior staffers privately about self worth and boundary setting at work. The results speak for themselves. Her department saw higher engagement scores and lower turnover than the company average over 2 years, a direct result attributed by HR surveys to increased trust stemming from new communication norms. After years spent masking her true self at work only led toward burnout rather than belonging, Tantra developed what she called a courageous conversations toolkit, which was adopted company wide as part of onboarding new hires into inclusive culture practices. Her story has influenced broader industry conversations around redefining professionalism through empathy driven leadership models. And it illustrates our third key insight. Self worth is non negotiable. For women and young ladies, especially, never settle for less than you deserve, no matter how appealing an opportunity may seem on the surface or who is offering it to you. Knowing your self worth is foundational to building a career rooted in authenticity and respect. These three cases, Letitia's podcast, Julie's advocacy work, and Tandra's leadership approach, reveal something profound about the nature of professional growth and organizational change. They suggest that the path forward isn't about developing thicker skin or learning to play the game better. It's about creating spaces where people can show up as their full, authentic selves, where vulnerability is not just permitted, but valued as a catalyst for connection and growth. But I want to be clear about something. When I talk about vulnerability in professional spaces, I'm not suggesting that the burden of creating change should fall on those who are already marginalized. I'm not saying that Black women or any other underrepresented group should have to make themselves more vulnerable in hostile environments. What I am saying is that organizations have a responsibility to create conditions where authentic vulnerability is possible for everyone, where psychological safety is a priority, where diverse experiences are valued, and where truth telling is rewarded rather than punished. And for those in positions of relative privilege or power, there's a particular responsibility to model vulnerability, to create space for others' stories, and to respond to those stories with empathy and action. The research on this is clear. Teams with higher psychological safety, where members feel they can take interpersonal risks without fear of punishment or humiliation, are more innovative, more productive, and better at solving complex problems. Organizations that prioritize inclusion and belonging see higher retention rates, greater employee satisfaction, and better business outcomes. But beyond these measurable benefits, there's something more fundamental at stake. In a world that often asks us to compartmentalize our identities, to be one person at work and another at home, the opportunity to bring our whole selves to our professional lives represents a kind of liberation. It allows us to direct our energy toward creation and contribution rather than concealment and coping. As Brittany Jenkins so powerfully articulated in our interview, when we create spaces where people can tell their truths without fear, we're not just building better workplaces, we're healing historical wounds and creating new possibilities for what work can be. This vision of workplaces where authentic vulnerability is valued, where community counters isolation, and where self worth is non negotiable may seem idealistic. But the cases I've shared today demonstrate that it's not just possible, it's already happening in pockets of transformation across industries. I want to challenge you today, not just to think differently, but to act differently, to recognize that the conventional wisdom about professionalism and vulnerability isn't just outdated, it's actively harmful. It's perpetuating systems of exclusion and isolation that diminish not just individual potential, but organizational possibility. What would happen if tomorrow you entered your workplace committed to creating space for authentic vulnerability, both for yourself and for others? What if you stopped policing your own emotions or the emotions of others according to outdated norms of professionalism? What if you listened, really listened to the stories of those whose experiences differ from your own? This isn't just about being nicer or more inclusive. This is about fundamentally reimagining what work can be. It's about creating spaces where people don't just survive, but thrive, where innovation flourishes because diverse perspectives are truly valued, where burnout decreases because people aren't exhausting themselves maintaining professional facades. The path forward isn't easy. It requires courage, it requires commitment, it requires a willingness to be uncomfortable. But the alternative, continuing to perpetuate systems that silence, isolate, and diminish, is far more costly, not just to individuals, but to our collective potential. So I challenge you, be brave enough to be vulnerable, be courageous enough to create space for others' vulnerability. And in doing so, join the quiet revolution that's already underway, a revolution that's transforming workplaces from sites of conformity and constraint to spaces of authenticity, connection, and unprecedented possibility. The future of work isn't just about new technologies or flexible arrangements, it's about new ways of being human together. And that future begins with the courage to be vulnerable, to tell our truths, and to hear the truths of others. Thank you.